Hey y'all, I'm back again, y'all. That was quick, feels like. Another cycle of the full moon on Ogun's internet in this wild western world at the start of the fall. The fall already. Talking to my community, my Thibodaux community, about how we making out with all this mental health stuff. What even is that? What does all that mental health matters, mental health stuff even mean? What does that even look like? Looking at that, check it in with that. So we've been talking. This is our 7th session. It's our second to last session. So if you haven't caught up with us yet, the other 6 sessions are up online, so go check it out so you can catch up, because we've been talking down all the way. We done come all the way to the fall, talking down fall already. Fall and a lot of ancient, like, spiritual practices and teachings of people who kind of navigate life through listening through nature and spirit and things like that. Fall is the season of grief, because it's a season that is about going inward. Things are dying, things are slowing down, things are transitioning, and so a lot of grief comes up, especially during these times. And usually when we hear the word grief, we usually only think about sadness. And of course, sadness is a big part of grief, but grief is an experience that holds under it many emotions. And one of them that we don't really talk about is anger. For example, you ever notice that when someone very important in the family structure dies, like the grandmother or the matriarch, someone like big and important to the family structure, transitions out of the body, soon after the family erupts into conflict or fighting, and things just start to fall apart. You ever notice that in your family? It's anger. That's that part of the grieving process that we really don't know how to make space for. And it not only shows up in death, but it shows up in losses of all kinds. It could be losses of all kinds, transitions, changes in life. And it doesn't just show up in our biological families. It shows up in partnerships. It could show up in partnerships and relationships, all kinds. So that's the story I'm going to share with y'all today on our second to last session of the Come See About Yourself and all this mental health stuff. What does that even mean? How does this all relate to what's happening now and what we saw in the past, and how do we deal with this? So this story is about how I had my own little good times episode when I moved to Chicago in 2013. And if you don't know what I mean by good times episode, you also could go check out the video that I made last time, session 6. But a good time, like on good times, on their episodes, they always thought they was just about to make it, and then something happened. And that's what Chicago felt initially to me. Like, this was going to be my way out of the ghetto. I thought I figured out the keys to life. I thought I figured out my way out of suffering. I thought I figured out how it finally was going to be better. Just like the Evans family on Good Times thought they had so many times. But also, just like in their episodes, right before the end of the day, whatever the things were that they thought they had that would save them did not come through. And that's what I had. That's what I had. An experience where I had to come face to face with that realization and how that truly felt. So in 2013, when I packed up all my belongings along with my 8-year-old son, taking both of us from the only place we really knew is home, away from both of our families, little did I know that nothing in Chicago would be as I thought it would be in the beginning. The job that I thought I had, that I thought would soon start when I got there, didn't quite have the funding yet, so I was unemployed, and that ended up lasting for a whole year. My truck that I actually drove out there started acting up, stopping on me in the middle of the snowy, unfamiliar Chicago street. So now I'm living without reliable transportation and no job and no income. I had to borrow money from friends. The list just went on, y'all. My son was experiencing issues focusing and concentrating in class. It was just, the list went on. I was having a tough time. Tough to the bone. I started to feel so overwhelmed with hopelessness, so much fear of how I'm going to survive, and more importantly, how I'm going to take care of this little black boy. I had so many feelings and stories coming up about myself. I was shamed. It was like I had failed. I felt kind of almost abandoned by life. And I felt so sad and angry about that. All these familiar feelings and thoughts I've experienced different times throughout my life, but when they all hit this time, they all hit at the same time, and I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't ignore it like I've done multiple times throughout my life too. And the scariest part of this all was I didn't feel safe enough to share this with anyone. Not even my close childhood homegirl who lived in Chicago already, who me and my son was staying with at the time. It was supposed to be temporary until we got on our feet. But couldn't get on my feet because I had no job. So I was just I can remember just feeling so miserable at times. But all the while, I'm trying to hold all of this inside while still going through my daily life, acting like everything was normal. But the grief was changing me. I was grieving who I thought I was. I was grieving what I thought my life would be. And that really was changing me. It was like I was breaking open. And grief is supposed to change us in a lot of ways. However, we don't usually know how to move through all these story of emotions that grief and loss brings up for us in safe ways. It's something that we're not really taught to do. So it definitely affected my relationships with some of my closest friends. The very thing that I needed at the time was to be able to be vulnerable with my community of sisters and friends, my sisterhood of friends, but most times I couldn't. I just shut down. Most times I shut down, thinking that I was doing good, keeping most of it to myself, but I wasn't, because that's not how emotions work. But that's how I was taught. That's how I was taught. That's how I grew up, watching adults engage with difficult emotions by shutting down, isolating, um, pretending like they weren't bothered. You don't show sadness or weakness. You feeling sad, you ignore it. You hide it. You deflect and harden. You judge and condemn others. You talk about each other. You distance yourself and say things like, "This is why I don't mess with black folks. Family, such and such. I don't mess around with family. Family always," all these stories started to come up. And we definitely, as a family, didn't know how to move through family conflicts and trauma with understanding and compassion. But we don't, I didn't have those tools. We didn't grow up with those types of tools. What I really needed at that time was to ball up in a fetal position on the ground and cry, and have a group of my friends hold healing space and hold circle around me. Shit, we probably all needed that as we was navigating so many transitions as black women um, at that time. But I know I didn't even think that was a thing or that was even safe. I had no models of how to soften, how to really be held, how to receive care, especially during moments of feeling sad and defeated. I was raised up saying things like, as long as you have clothes on your back and food on the table, you should just be grateful. So I had no way of even understanding how to hold space for myself in those difficult emotions like sadness and anger. Shit, most of our parents didn't have that growing up themselves. So of course, the adults in my family couldn't teach me that. So I was going through some feelings I didn't even know how to work through, and I definitely didn't know how to communicate that to my friends. Yes, I was going to church at the time. I enjoyed my spiritual community. I was fed spiritually, everything. I had the deep-rooted connection to spirit, I felt like, at the time. And there was a part of my human experience that I needed more help with. I needed someone that with tools that could help me through these panic attacks that I was having, or this cortisol constantly coursing through my body from the extra hypervigilance of what was happening, how I was living in this fast-paced, extreme city with no job, no income, living with somebody, needing help all the time, having suicidal thoughts, all of this. I had needs that I didn't even know how to communicate, or when I did communicate, it wasn't done in a way that my friends could understand. And I felt my friends had needs they weren't able to communicate with me, and when they did, I couldn't understand. And it ended up just erupting in big conflicts and ruptures and some of the most important friendships in my life. People who were like sisters to me at the time. I experienced some emotions and feelings and thoughts that cracked me open. And it was through this crack in my armor that I had built up around my heart, though, that was where the light started to pour in. How I started to heal. How I got deeper into my spiritual practice, deeper into the history of women in my ancestry, and the story of black mamas in my family, and how they were taught, and how they taught us as girls to close our hearts, to protect, to isolate, to harden, which was done to keep them safe wisely at the time from these reoccurring traumatic experience they all encountered in relationships and society and our families. But instead, I needed to learn practical tips and tools to help me to build the capacity to deeply feel the grief I was feeling, to process and communicate my emotions, to deal with the shame that I was feeling in a healthy way that didn't cause harm to myself and to others, and to know how to set boundaries and to communicate what I was feeling in my body. And I didn't have that, y'all. Until now. So, I'm going to pause on the story there. I don't go too deep into the story because it's less about the story and more about the experience and the sharing of my experience of why this work matters so much to me. All this mental health stuff, where does this even come from? So for y'all homework, for y'all practice from now until the next time we get together in our group healing sessions, which will be our last one, I want you to ask yourself, how did y'all address conflicts in your family when you were young? And even now, I want you to think about the women in your family, how they dealt with it. I want you to think about the men in your family, how they dealt with it. And now, think about how you deal with stress and conflict. Not just what the others do, but what you do. How is it similar to the way you saw adults in your family, in your close community groups, deal with stress and conflict? How is it different? And I really want you to think about that. And this, come see about yourself. Come see about this stuff for yourself. Remember that? We talked about this. The ACEs. Things happen for reasons. All behavior tells a story. That's just not spiritually when we talk about karma. That is scientifically when we think about cause and effect. There's reasons why we show up the way that we show up and behave the way that we behave. And can we start to understand that and see if this is really how the way that really feels good to us? So that's the question that I really had to ask myself during the beginning of this healing process. So I want you to think about that. Me and my friend Tracy, we have this saying, like, how am I doing it? How am I doing it? I know, the other person may be doing it. But how am I doing it too? And I had to ask myself that question and be ready for that answer. And be ready to take action if that's something that I wanted to change. So, until next time, I'm going to talk to y'all later. Y'all doing so good. I want y'all to think about it. And we're going to wrap later. All right. Ashe. Peace.